Welcome to Drink in the Movies with Michael and Taylor. We're drinking Hellbent Brewing Company's Hoppin' Oats Ale.
Episode 1. Beer recommended by Taylor as a personal favorite.
It is certainly a personal favorite of mine. I've been drinking it for over 3 years now.
How would you describe this beer?
Delicious. Also,
Particularly delicious.
look at this pour. Barely any foam. I'm practically perfect.
Coming episodes, we hope to be endorsed by Hellbent Brewery.
Or really any beer alcohol company at
All breweries listening, we
Or
accept
alcohol.
all endorsements of any kind.
How would you describe the flavor palette, Michael?
A perfect summer beer. It's nice and light, crisp, particularly delicious, nice and chilled as we have it.
Believe it or not, it's just as
Cheers.
perfect for winter.
I can see that. It's versatile.
It's very warming. On this nice, humid 80-degree day.
It cools you down.
Well, we have a lot of movies to get to. Where do you want to start?
Rather than start with the most extreme on our list, the Gaspar Noé, I think we should start with something perhaps a little lighter.
Maybe, like the First Purge?
We could talk about the First Purge.
That is certainly a light fare. That or Sorry to Bother You are certainly more lighter films compared to Gaspar Noé's films.
I would agree. We'll save the Noé. Let's do Sorry to Bother You, since we both just saw
All right.
Sorry to Bother You.
Have you had a chance to listen to what Adam Kempenaar and Michael Phipps thought?
I have not. Have you?
I have. I
Got
disagree with them.
Where did they
liked
come out? Just a sort of baseline?
Just like you. They liked it.
They were positive on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And interesting. And it's fair to say you were negative to strongly negative.
Negative.
Yeah.
I really respect the diorama-like style that he does, where he's cutting from one scene to the next simultaneously while Lakeith is still in the previous scene, and then he begins talking to someone else in the next scene, and it kind of seamlessly transitions. It's a lot like, Spike Jonze's Being John Malkovich, which you have yet to see, but it's very, very similar in its eccentricness, and just trying to make a point about something. The thing is, I don't know what its points are, because it never sticks to any. Yeah. And there's no stakes. To quote
I would agree.
There's no stakes.
You
could say the finale gives stakes, but I disagree. I don't think that there's stakes there, because he still didn't... The foundation is the prison work.
Yeah, yeah.
That never comes to happen for him. So There's no stakes.
I don't disagree. I think I liked the same... I think what you liked about it, I liked as well, which are some of the stylistic choices.
Felt like we were seeing a young, even though he's actually in his late 30s, if not early 40s, Spike Lee. Like, I thought we were just seeing a guy that had the balls to go make what he wants to make. And I really want him to have a separate screenplay written by someone else.
I could see
to
that.
do that with.
Yeah. Yeah, like, I did appreciate sort of the boldness of it, even though the ideas were kind of, like, just messy, for, like, lack of a better word.
And there's a lot of good ideas that he glances over.
They just don't really cohere. But stylistically, like, I could just, like, hang out with these characters in, like, more of a hangout movie and be perfectly satisfied with it. I could just hang out with Tessa Thompson's character and, like, be perfectly delighted by that.
Maybe.
I like the choices.
I feel like I would get into a nuanced debate with her about what exactly she believes in.
Fair enough.
Because she does do that white voice to sell her paintings, or her art, and that is just completely glossed over.
Yeah, yeah.
But she's acting like she's holier than Lakeith Stanfield. Then she's doing the exact same things that he's doing, and acting like she's better than him.
Yeah.
When he's the one that's, like, providing where they're staying, at least in the film. We never see her staying in a house. We never,
Yeah.
So the way it's depicted is what he's doing, although is terrible, is also admirable because he's providing for Terry Crews to not lose his house, who's his uncle, all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. For a movie that, like, tried to do a lot of things deliberately so different and weird, I thought it was kind of funky to have this, like, romantic conflict develop.
Yeah.
I was like, this seems extremely
and then
ordinary.
Just disentangle instantly.
I agree.
Without, once again, no stakes.
Yeah.
But there's this one scene that I love. So I really hate the soft camera lens. I don't know if you noticed, but they would always build the whole scene around Lakeith or his face.
Yeah.
And the back would be softly blurred and out of depth. And I think that he might have done it specifically for this one scene where he's walking down the street and he trips and falls.
Yeah.
And behind him is this alley of parked cars.
Yeah.
And in that one scene, everything's in focus.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was a decision to try to make us think that he just had everything get into focus or not. Because I think that that's when the relationship goes back to going his way and he is about to learn his lesson in the coke den of Armie Hammer. But that was like my favorite cinematographic piece within the film. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the director, Boots Riley, right?
And he's a political activist, and he's the child of noted political activists. I don't know their names, but I did learn that listening to Film Spotting.
And he's a rapper,
yes.
right? And I think
just
that
like
does...
Lakeith. Did you know that?
Right, exactly. And I think that does kind of come through. Like, I do think the flow from scene to scene is kind of a musical... does have kind of a musical quality to it. The way that it was, like... It was pretty seamless from scene to scene, but I don't know
I don't know if I'd call it musical or, like... more specifically, like a specific instrument, like a drummer. Like it felt more like it was a drummer with a full kit, just a wide kit, and he's going from hi-hat to deep bass up to China, just instantly snap, 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 snap.
And I think that's what feels like pretty ambitious about it. Are these wild tonal shifts that do sort of feel like you're hitting every pitch on a drum kit, and I don't know that like.
He tuned the
really
kit
pulled
before
that
he
off.
started hitting them.
I mean, it's pretty just exhilarating, but I don't think that it really worked.
No, but
consistently at least.
I was really when I left the theater, I wasn't thinking about the movie. I was thinking about how excited I am for him to make more movies.
Right, it's someone who is going to at least go for broke, and that's better than someone who then plays it safe any day of the week.
I don't know that I'd agree with that because what's the gal that made Leave No Trace?
Deborah Granick.
I don't think that she does anything like that. I think that she definitely plays it safe, and I think that is just as powerful.
Well, I think you could argue that it isn't exactly safe to make a movie with such restraint. I think that is a risk in that you risk sort of alienating viewers who need something more stimulating than what she provides. So it's not going for broke in the same way that
I feel like Boots Riley actually wanted to go for broke.
Yeah.
And I feel like Deborah Granick never thought about it.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Like one of them is purposely fighting the power structure, and one is ignoring the power structure and making their own version of art without thinking about it. Much like a Paul Thomas Anderson would. Yeah. Just not even, I'm just making this movie about a middle-aged man dresser who, is abusive to women, and, it ends with mushroom trips.
Yeah. I thought there were maybe just like one too many characters in Sorry to Bother You. I don't think that the Asian character who led sort of the employee uprising.
Stephen Yeun did a great job acting, but yes,
I thought he was fine. But as one more thing to involve, Tessa Thompson's character hooking up with him, I just thought like this is too much of a tangent to really contribute to what's going on. There's already plenty going on.
So if he stayed as a limited side character without his own plot.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to take the chance to appreciate him because you never get to appreciate Stephen Yeun. He's never going to have his own movie, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless he gets his own Columbus, like John Cho did, which is very, very, God, that's never going to happen.
Yeah. I liked Lakeith Stanfield. I wouldn't have replaced him with anybody in particular. I thought he pulled off what he was supposed to do.
I can say Armie Hammer's acting doesn't work for me. Not just there, but it just doesn't work for me. Watching that, I noticed that my criticism of Call Me By Your Name was just accentuated. Like, I just don't like his acting style. I liked him in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., where he plays a spy that doesn't really do much.
I like that movie.
Verbally. But anytime he's verbal, much like early Bradley Cooper, I feel like I can see him acting. I can see him making choices in the moment. Yeah. And I don't like that. I'd love to like it, but I don't. It's fun. If it was a TV show, it would be fun. Yeah. But it's a film. He's supposed to be more... he's supposed to have more gravitational pull to weight the film, I think. And he doesn't do that to me. He makes it go more out of the world. He de-gravitizes it for me.
Yeah, I could maybe see him having more success if he went for more of like a Ryan Gosling kind of acting style, where he just says less. I think his skill might take off a little bit more if it's more nonverbal. I do think when he starts talking and says too much, it's when that idea that he is acting kind of comes through. Yeah, it's like, but I sort of like his.
It's like there. When he talks, I don't believe his emotions. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if he didn't talk, I'd believe his emotions. If that makes sense. And I really don't like Cooper's early work, Bradley Cooper. Yeah. And it does the same thing for me. Same for Benedict Cumberbatch. It's like these actors are great on the stage, but they don't suit a picture where you can consistently see the choices they're making on repeat. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, when there's already enough visual information to kind of tell us what we need to know about them, their talking sometimes seems to just take it in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I think that the best way to explain it is he's trying to make us feel a certain way, and he knows that. Right. Other actors try to feel a certain way, and then we witness them feeling that. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I could have maybe replaced him, but otherwise I think I was pretty satisfied with the cast.
I don't know if I didn't like Tessa Thompson's character, or if I didn't see her doing what I saw her do in like Thor Ragnarok, where I was enamored by her comedic timing. She didn't have a role where I was laughing personally. I don't know if other people found her like earrings funny or whatever, but I was just like, it's absurd, but at some point absurdity doesn't mean that you get to have a cheap laugh anymore. You know, like the first time I was like, okay. Second time I was like, okay. Third time I was like, all right, this isn't as funny as the photo. Just show me the photo of the dad.
Right. Yeah. I keep hearing people describe the movie as a comedy, which I don't think is really the right single word descriptor.
Well, it seems to be that there seems to be a claim being made that if you don't view it as a comedy, you aren't being open-minded.
Right.
Which is a very interesting thing to say, that you are a certain type of person if you don't see the film in a certain way. Right. That's a very interesting idea that's going around right now.
Yeah, I think some of the ideas have a comedic element to them for sure, but I didn't find like many of the deliberate attempts for humor to be like that funny. Like I don't think Boots Riley is someone who I expect to make funny movies going forward. So I think that's wrong for people to go in expecting laughs.
I think the funniest thing to me was when he was talking to Tessa, and then the camera turns and she's in the cubicle next to him, and I'm like, what the fuck? She works here now?
That was pretty funny. Yeah, and those were more some visual humor, which were pretty satisfying. Yeah. I can't say there are any lines that I'm going to repeat that were particularly funny. So I think it is.
There is one, but it has to do with horse cocks.
Okay, there's maybe something there. Right. I absolutely could have done without the tacked on ending. I don't know if we're a spoiler podcast or not, but
the garage door scene
at the end
was the best way to end it.
Oh, you did like that?
No, I think that was the best way to end it. Did you leave before the following ending?
Well, now I'm trying to remember what happened before and after the credits.
Before the credits, he closes the garage door and he turns around and his nostrils have shifted.
Right.
And then it goes to credits.
Right.
And then it goes to a certain uprising scene where Armie Hammer is in his mansion.
Right.
And that felt terrible to me.
I could have done without him growing the nose. I would have ended it before him growing the nose.
But then you don't. I don't know. For me, I was very interested in if the powder was coke or not.
Right.
I wanted that payoff to know. And if they wouldn't have told me, I would have been like, "That's annoying," and then I would have forgot about the movie. And I feel like because if they would have turned him and then not shown the uprising, I would have been like, "Oh shit! Did he go to the jail work centers? What happened?"
That's interesting to me. I think I had the complete opposite reaction, where as soon as I know whether or not like what he snorted was the powder or the cocaine, that gives me a reason to forget. Sometimes the ambiguity is like what leaves it in my mind.
But ambiguity in and of itself is lazy, because then the writer of the screenplay didn't have an original thought through perspective, right? Ambiguity in certain films does lead to deeper thought. Yeah. But in a lot of first time screenplays, that's just laziness.
It's late. I mean, I guess you can just you can call it lazy. It does require less writing, but I think it can be more affecting. Like it leaves more for me, for my mind to do, to contemplate what sort of the possible outcomes are.
So I guess if you want to not know, though. I think that when you have a plot that is as flurried and as scribbly as this, if you leave it open to interpretation, that to me makes it even lazier. Yeah. Like at least it committed. At least it decided that it wanted to make this person into this, and that it wanted to make its genre actually science fiction, which I did not go in expecting a science fiction film.
I did not either.
And I can say I liked it more than Annihilation.
Oh, let's not even compare.
As a science fiction film, I did like it more.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I was not expecting it either, and I thought everything with the horse bolt was great. It was tremendously satisfying. That was funny and twisted and just surprising in a way that I was not expecting.
Full black and white colorblind me. When he turns into that jade door, I had no idea it was the wrong thing, and I was like, "Why are there so many showers?" Like I was absolutely gullible to the whole thing, and then when he opens that door,
you totally sympathize,
and it crashes down. I was like, "No fucking way!"
You're like, "What is happening in this movie?"
And the next thought was,
"We just earned our mature audiences
respect
benchmark."
Or we could just edit this out.
That's true. Fix it in post.
Yeah, there's
a
snip.
So yeah, I mean, not one that I'm really eager to see again, but eager to see whatever he does next.
Yes, and hopefully he gets someone else's screenplay. I'd love to see a long gestating Spike Lee screenplay get given to him with Spike Lee as an executive producer, with Jordan Peele as a creative consultant or something.
Right, I think sort of the right people pointing him in a certain direction could be helpful.
I think it was on Film Spotting, they said that ending, that added-on ending, is the type of ending that Jordan was talked out of. By Blumhouse. And so I think he does need someone like that. Because he did go to the film festivals and say that I want to sell this instead of going to a production company first and getting funding.
Right.
So Annapurna picked it up post. And I think that if Annapurna would have told him to cut that and been firm on it, it would have been a better film.
Yeah. I think that is exciting filmmaking when you know you have a director who's going kind of big enough that they might need some direction in terms of, when to sort of, pull back a little bit versus directors that aren't really going far enough.
Don't even tell them to pull back. Let them shoot the whole thing how they see it.
Yeah.
And then work with them and the editor to try to actually have a conversation about. Because doing something for money sounds really lazy and really cheating. But things that make the most money do tend to stay in the public consciousness the longest. Right? Yeah. We're still having conversations about Avatar, whether or not we want to. We're still having conversations about the Titanic, and whether or not
people have to have seen it to have a conversation. So.
Exactly, and these are the highest grossing films.
Yeah.
And because someone else saw it, other people will see it. And so if you really think your ideas are worth ingesting and gestating on, you have to try to make enough money in the market to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Or else you're just going to be relegated to
there has to be
the corners.
There has to be some sort of success to as an additional hurdle to even sort of make it like into the consciousness.
Because it's basically impossible to make Clerks or Do the Right Thing now. It's just not going to happen.
It will disappear pretty quickly.
You don't get to make Once Upon a Time in Mexico just right off the bat after you make Desperado or you know, El Mariachi. Yeah. There is no Reservoir Dogs in waiting. I mean, other than Hereditary.
Exactly. So, I'm more positive, you're a little more negative, but equally interested in what he does next.
Excited.
Yeah.
Excited for what he does next. And really hopeful that he gets someone else's screenplay.
Fair enough.
And I'd like to see Lakeith stay with him. I think that Lakeith is the perfect actor for that type of a vision.
I agree.
Just like Daniel Kaluuya was the perfect actor for Jordan's vision and Get Out.
Right. I think this is... I can't think of many other things I liked Lakeith Stanfield in as much as this.
Atlanta.
I have not seen Atlanta, but...
That's his problem, people. He has not seen Atlanta. You should see Atlanta. No. What should we move on to?
You pick.
Well, I was just more negative, so I'd like to be more positive. But I don't think that there's any... I think that I'm just going to kind of be the asshole positive here. I mean, we could do Sicario. I feel like I really liked that movie.
Yeah, I think you liked it more than me.
Yeah.
I think if we're referring to Letterboxd reviews, you gave it a 4, I gave it a 3.
Yeah.
But we both gave it hearts.
We are talking about Sicario: Day of the Soldado, not the original Sicario, which is one of the greatest films ever made, period.
Bold words.
Well, Denny
being thrown out there.
So.
Yeah.
I mean, greatest ever made, period, is, about a 5,000 film range.
Right. Yeah. I liked it overall. I was positive on it, but I would agree it does not come close to stacking up against the first.
Okay, but budgetary constraints.
Sure.
Missing one of the top 5 working directors today that's doing the types of projects that Denny's doing. Missing I would say personally the best cinematographer working today, Roger Deakins.
Absolutely.
Missing one of the top 3 actresses working today, Emily Blunt.
Right.
It's a pretty fucking good movie in despite of these things.
Right, but I mean, a great movie like you can only sort of say like in spite of this so many times.
So you have to say in spite of because you're purposefully comparing it to the previous one. You do have to take into account what's missing.
That's fair.
That's like if The Dark Knight wasn't made by the same guy that made Batman Begins, that would be a huge talking point, and we would accept it because it's a cultural icon. Because Sicario isn't necessarily a cultural icon. I think you do have to like make it plain that Emily Blunt isn't in it. Why? Because they literally wrote her out in the first one.
Right.
Why isn't Denny doing this? He's making Dune. Why isn't Deakins doing this? Because he's fucking Deakins.
Yeah, and I think the direction it goes in feels right, considering that her character is no longer there. In the first, I felt like she was sort of like our moral center, like with all of these
people say that. I agree that if you view that it has a moral center, she was it. But I don't think the first Sicario had a moral center. I think that it didn't, and that's what crushed her.
True.
Because she tried to have one and it didn't work. Also, Daniel Kaluuya was great in that. Just gotta point that out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely fair point. But I guess maybe it's her trying to find some morality, some hopefulness in this sort of scenario that seems so bleak that we sort of identify with.
Literally gets in the way and ends up almost killing her. In the case of John Bernthal's character. Right. So it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And she's only saved by the hero of the second film.
Right.
Who saves another girl.
Right.
At the cost of his own life.
Right.
Until the very end.
So her efforts at sort of locating any goodness and sort of this and sort of this mess that she's wound up in fails. But you do sort of align with her sort of with her hope, right? Even though that's what ultimately gets in a way.
I understand a lot of people did. I didn't. I aligned with Benicio because Benicio was the only one getting things done. Right. There was a lot of bureaucrats asking for things to get done, and Benicio was the only one who was affected in such a way where the only thing that he could do was do these terrible things. And because he had an enthralling and ethical reason to do it, a moral center for doing it, made it very compelling. And so I was more on his side in that final scene in the first Sicario than I was on her side. And it's very interesting how many people are on Emily Blunt's side. Because I love her as an actress. Like, she's one of my favorites. But I was like, you can't have a moral center and deal with narcotic gangs that are killing and stringing people up, putting people in the walls. Like, you can't have a moral center and not die.
Right. I guess I would describe her as very much the hero that is unsuccessful. As an unsuccessful
I feel like
hero.
Her purpose is that you can't be a hero in the situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And Benicio del Toro is much more clearly an anti-hero in the first, as he is in the second, where we really don't have anything even close to a hero.
I think it's debatable because, I mean, is Batman an anti-hero? I mean, he doesn't kill people like Benicio, but his parents get killed, his family gets killed, and he goes and stops criminals. And he uses arguably illegal means to do so. Benicio's family is killed. He uses arguably illegal means to get retribution and to tackle the issues.
Right, and retribution, I think, is the key word. Where I don't think of Batman as one who has vengeance on his mind. I think Benicio del Toro
he does occasionally. He does occasionally, but yes.
But he doesn't go after. Does he go after his parents' killers at any point?
It depends on which series.
That's fair.
But yeah, there is
which
like
Batman
a late 70s or early 80s series where he actually like gets retribution and turns into
very satisfying.
A villain, and I think the Joker ends up becoming a hero. It's a really weird like 6 comic arc, I think.
Yeah. Sounds very satisfying.
Tune in to Fat Man on Batman for more details on that.
New series
with Kevin Smith.
But I think where Sicario did the Soldado did sort of fail for me was when it did try to find sources of hope in what was just too
when did
bleak
it find
of a
sources
movie.
Of hope?
When Josh Brolin has sort of this change of heart towards the end, and he says "fuck the rules" and decides to help get the girl back across the border. I thought
I didn't view it as that. I didn't view it as him changing. I viewed it as he had the opportunity to manipulate the legislation to serve his friend, who is dead.
Yeah.
I didn't view it as a change of heart at all. I viewed it as I can get away with this. I viewed the whole movie as I can get away with this, not as anything more than that. Because it's all about what you can get away with in spite of the federal government's oversight. To me, that's how the film played out to me. There's federal oversight from Catherine Keener. What can you get away with? What can you not tell her? What does Benicio have to do in order to keep the girl alive? And how can he play that so that Brolin knows as little as possible? And how can Brolin play that to Keener so that she knows as little as possible? And it ends up turning into the order to kill him. And they end up not being able to kill him because he's quote-unquote killed, shot in the face by someone else. And that was one of my favorite pieces of mask work probably ever done.
Yeah.
When he's taken off the bus and they put the cover on his head and they tape him and everything. And he's acting through this mask of death. It was just incredible. Yeah,
I do think
it's terribly moving.
Just him as an individual person within the film was by far the most compelling. I don't think Josh Brolin. He's one of the most
enjoyable actors.
Yeah, I don't think Josh Brolin. He kind of does what he needs to do, but I don't find him particularly memorable in any way like Benicio del Toro is, who's just fucking badass.
I do think that Brolin was very good at being a government employee. Like he definitely made me believe that he was in a way that like if Clint Eastwood would have made that movie, whoever he would have cast in that role, I would have been like, fucking bullshit. Yeah. You know, like Brolin has the commitment to behave as if he is such.
Yeah.
Whereas whoever Clint Eastwood normally picks would not have that in that type of a film. You know, Sully is a totally different case where it's like an amazing character piece. But whenever he, like American Sniper, I just did not believe that Cooper was who Cooper pretended to be.
Right. Yeah, I agree. On a pure filmmaking standpoint, I don't think I felt anything in this movie as deeply as I felt certain things in the original, which again, like, you know, comparing everything to the original isn't super fair.
Okay, but what about the finale? Let's just that's the fulcrum of the movie.
I was going to start at the beginning.
The beginning of the movie is pointless to talk about. It really is.
I don't know that it's pointless to talk about. I mean, it's showing some ostensibly pretty disturbing stuff, right? These terrorist attacks that, you know, that are showing, you know, a mom and her kid getting blown up at the grocery store. Like, it's pretty severe stuff. Yeah,
so ISIS is sneaking in through the Mexican border. Right. Which is giving a compelling argument to, if you want to say make a wall or to get harder on ICE or Border Patrol, whatever you want to say. It makes a very compelling case for that, and then it goes further to make a very compelling case against it, and it shows both sides of it.
Right.
Which
I just don't know that some of those scenes were as compelling as a better director might have made them.
Well, duh. That's like asking, do you wish Scorsese directed this movie? And me saying, duh.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, that's part of the point of having the conversation, is right? It's just like what the difference is between a better director and a worse director.
Name a science fiction movie that you gave 3 stars or under that you don't wish was directed by Nolan. You know what I mean? Like, you don't wish Nolan directed that?
I do. Oh, I do wish Nolan had directed that. You're
right. So, like, anything that you're kind of lower on, you're going to wish that a better director had. But just the nature of film is you can't always have these great directors, right? And even when a great director comes along, it doesn't save the piece. A Wrinkle in Time was terrible.
True.
It was an awful film. And Chris Pine had a wonderful performance. Michael Pena was incredible in his very limited role. But the movie was terrible. It was absolutely awful. Just complete piece of CG trash. I didn't see it in 3D. Maybe it was better in 3D. Right. So this is one of those things where they made it for a very affordable budget.
Yeah.
It's earned more than its budget back already, including marketing.
Right.
And I don't know. The ending was one of my favorite endings in cinema all year.
So, What do you make of the ending? Benicio del Toro talking to that kid. Do you
want to be a Sicario?
But you don't expect him to hurt the kid versus train the kid or something like that? Do you take it one way or the other?
If he's going to start his own quote unquote cartel,
right?
But a cartel of mercs. Of Sicarios. Right.
Which I do think, like, that is a tremendous note to end on. To me, that is sort of in line with, like, the cynical tone of the thing versus something that's more optimistic. Like, nothing about this movie is optimistic.
Like, this is
I like the idea that he says, like, the only people you can look out for is yourself. And, like, this kid gets it. I like this kid.
Yes.
And
it's the kid that shot him in the face.
Yeah. I was on board with it.
This is one of those movies where I really hope that it's a different director next film.
Yeah.
And I really hope that it ends in the next film. Like, I really do think this could be one of those genre transitioning pieces of character work trilogies that really is fondly remembered in 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Before trilogy is now.
Yeah.
Right? But previously, the Before films didn't have that much credence, specifically before the second one.
Right.
It was kind of like okay, so you want to be Jim Jarmusch thing.
Yeah.
And now it's, viewed as the genius it is, because I think that paired with Boyhood really cemented him as a respectable filmmaker where people feel very confident about going and buying that Criterion Collection trilogy DVD or Blu-ray and saying, this is one of my favorite trilogies of all time.
Right.
Sort of, yeah. You and I could have a debate where we both agree that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy isn't better than the Before trilogy,
Yeah.
But it also isn't worse.
Yeah.
They're both fantastic trilogies.
Right. Yeah, I think I think how we sort of like think about these in hindsight is just going to have like a lot to do with sort of like what happens like in politics in like the next like 20 to 50 years, which is something that like really, you know, the cultural landscape I don't think plays as much of a role in, I don't know, I might take this back, but I don't think the cultural landscape plays as much of a role in how our affection for a trilogy like the before trilogy will change over time versus something like Sicario, Day of the Soldado, which I think really is like so satisfying right now when people are like particularly disillusioned with their government, and they're like, there's something very satisfying about just seeing like the shittiness of the powers that be on hand. You're like, yeah, these people do suck.
Yeah, and it's definitely,
people might not want to revisit that. It's hard to know. I think we
that
will.
The reason why the before trilogy holds up
yeah.
isn't because of politics.
Right.
It's because of character work.
Totally.
I think the reason that the Dark Knight trilogy holds up isn't because of the politics, and there were politics in play back then.
Sure.
You got to remember that.
Yeah.
It's the character work.
Right.
I don't think that Benicio del Toro will be remembered for his political statement film. I think he'll be remembered for his amazing character work. And if we're really, really, really lucky, a few people will remember that mask work that he did when he was shot in the head.
I agree.
Which was incredible.
It was pretty good.
I think that's a good spot to end it.
I agree.
Don't know that we got more. So let's hop to something else. Pick something that I'm going to be negative on, because all of them I'm going to be more negative on because we're saving Noé.
Yeah, then I think we should go back towards the top to another more recent film, which was Three Identical Strangers, a documentary. It's good to shift towards a documentary.
I don't know. Anyway. I call it a mockumentary, maybe.
Oh, so quite strongly negative.
Is a documentary's objective to be objective?
It sounds like you think this was not objective.
Well, it definitely isn't. I think that you know that, judging by your own review on Letterboxd of what happens in the last 10 to 5 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, but before that, they are interviewed and asked questions, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Do you hear the questions?
We do not, as we don't in a lot of docs, right?
I think that in a documentary about psychoanalysis like this, asking leading questions is particularly nefarious. Whereas if it was about someone's experience, like an Allison, I don't think you saw that, but it's a documentary that came out this year. It's available on Amazon Prime streaming. She is a woman from South Africa who was brutally raped by 2 men, disemboweled, had her neck slashed more than 40 times, and managed to collect herself and carry herself to a road and survive. Whoa. This documentary, Allison, is presented very similarly, but because it's one person's take on their own act of survival.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mind a lack of objectivity.
Mm-hmm.
In a film like this, where the crux of the twist, quote unquote, is a famous study that almost every psychology student has to study before they finish their first semester of psychology.
Yeah.
And they don't have any objectivity to it. It's very, very flawed.
So let's kind of go piece by piece in the documentary. So the first, I wouldn't, maybe not the first half, but the first third is just about the brothers, sort of.
The surviving brothers.
Correct. The surviving brothers, which...
Talking about how they feel. And how they felt.
How they felt as they found each other, right?
But also you have to acknowledge that that's them now. Saying how they felt then.
Sure.
And it's in front of a camera.
Yeah.
Okay. And is this a documentary funded by a political company? Yes, it is. It's funded by CNN Films, just like RBG.
Right.
I say RBG is a lot better of a documentary.
So what are the... I'm not sure what the questions are that you think were leading? You know, for like just starting with that first chunk of the film, which I think is probably
we didn't hear the questions that were asked in that, specifically the first third. You don't hear a single question asked to them. You just hear them talking.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure like what I would have felt was leading. I mean, to me, a good portion of the start of the film was just about their astonishment at discovering their double, which I think would be an astonishing thing. And I thought that was a perfectly fine.
But I felt like it was staged. I kept feeling like the whole thing was staged.
The interviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the way that they were expressing and acting things out, I felt like it was take 3 almost.
That's fair, and I think I agree with you to an extent. Like, I don't think this was like a really honest set of interviews, like where he really managed to get close to these guys and get them to say like just exactly what's coming to their mind. But I did sort of get swept up in that feeling of just how astonishing this would be to realize you had 2 brothers who not only had you never met, but that are your doubles.
No, I had to keep reminding myself that I should be trying to think that, because I already knew what it was about, because I've been aware of the Twin Study for a long time. So it felt like it was manipulating me into making a political point at the end, almost the entire time, by using empathy to mask a political agenda.
Interesting. I agree.
And that's not that I am against the political agenda of making the study open. I'm completely for it. It's just they weren't upfront about it, and they pretended like it's like saying that you're gonna make what's that girl that was kidnapped when we were very little? Jean-Benet Ramsey.
Oh yeah.
It's like saying you're gonna make a Jean-Benet Ramsey film and pretending that she's not gonna get kidnapped halfway through. You know, like it was like that. Like I heard other people laughing. I think I heard someone crying. You know, like people were moved. I wasn't one of them. And just to be clear, I love documentaries so much that might be why I don't like this. Like Icarus was almost one of my top 10 films last year.
Yeah.
Because that's a documentary where you don't even get to be objective. You present objective facts that you're aware of, but because Russian just politics are so oppressive, you can't even try to get an objective side from them. Yeah. So it makes it such. There's that other movie where I think it's called This Is Not a Film.
Yeah, I know of it. Yeah.
Where it's a quote unquote documentary of, I don't remember his name, acting out his own film, and it's this heartbreaking scene. I won't go into it, but like these are some of my favorite documentaries. Yeah. And I don't mind a lack of objectivity when you're being oppressed. Yeah. But start with the oppression. Don't wait until 3/4 of the film in to say that this adoption center is oppressive and they're repressing the ability for us, or the Jewish board of families is keeping us from being able to get the sealed study. Yeah. Start with, this is a Yale sealed study case, and we're going to show you what it was like to be them.
Well, I think this plays very differently then for somebody who already knows exactly where this is going versus someone who doesn't, right? For someone who doesn't, it's sort of playing out more like how it played out for the brothers, where what they first learned was that they were triplets without the knowledge of what would follow.
Is purposefully manipulative or not? Because I'm on the side of, I think it's purposefully manipulative.
No, I think, to me, in that sense, the order of the order in which you receive information is just similar to the order in which the brothers received it. They first met each other without any idea that their lives had been orchestrated, and we subsequently learned that as they did. I totally get that. Had you known that in advance, you might want to work backwards.
And not just work backwards, just work honestly.
Oof. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if you have a point that you're going to get to in a documentary, be upfront with it. You know, you don't need to tell me everything about how the Jewish Board of Family is repressing the study in the beginning. Yeah. Because they had to like tag that on in the white letters at the end credits. Almost.
Right.
But say they were experimented on or something. Lead with that. And then let
I think
viewer...
that's just to me that's a different kind of movie. Where that feels more like an essay doc, which makes sense. Here is my thesis, and here's the essay, here's the information for it.
Yes.
But I think I got more out of from this form, which is just different. I guess it's not what you would have preferred. Obviously.
No, the close-ups on the face, trying to make how they feel, like so overtly...
maybe a little heavy-handed.
Yeah, that's a light-handed way of putting it, I suppose.
It felt more like I was experiencing it as they did in terms of the sequence of events. And then I agree. Then to sort of try to make to put the thesis at the end or make a point at the end, I think that was a misstep for sure. And it's too severe.
And it's a documentary filmmaker making a scientific claim,
right?
Where his evidence is how these people felt for the previous hour. I don't know if you know what bias means, but that is the inherent version of it.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a pretty bleak movie. It leaves you feeling pretty queasy, right? That imagine you didn't know any of this. You suddenly realize that these three guys had their lives had sort of been manipulated. That's a shitty feeling. I feel like surely this director felt like he had to come up with something upbeat, to end this with, which I think is, I get the wanting to find that, but it turned out pretty sentimental and just silly.
I guess that's an interesting point because I do understand why you would want to do that, right? Yeah. Same type of story. Have you ever read The Island of Dr. Moreau?
I have not.
Okay, so basically there's an island, man is shipwrecked on it, there's a doctor there, Dr. Moreau. He's performing experiments where he turns animals into people and they're in shrieking agony because of it. And this Jaguar Man scene is one of the most despicable, queasy pieces of literature I've ever read.
Yeah.
And it goes so far as to save the hero that we're with on the island. He makes a skiff, he escapes the island, and he's picked up by a ship, and I believe that's exactly how it ends.
Yeah.
That book wouldn't have been better if it ended bleakly.
Right.
This film would have.
Right.
So I understand why you would want to do that, but I think that the decision was wrong. Specifically the form. The Island of Dr. Moreau is implicitly a science fiction novella. This is a documentary about reality.
Right.
And someone's making claims about a very complicated science, which is psychoanalysis.
Right. And he's a filmmaker. He's not a scientist.
No, and the people that debate nature versus nurture, I mean, some of them are so far into their careers that they have a side to pick, but most of them don't have a side, and they just love hearing more data and compiling.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I would have loved a more neutral, non-empathetic style of documentary.
Right.
It was just how forceful they were. Those close-ups on the faces where they're trying to show how they felt when their brother commits suicide was just preposterous. And that's the other thing. They play it like it wasn't published in newspapers or commonly known. And I understand that the common moviegoer doesn't know about it. But most of the people that turn up for a documentary know something about this type of stuff because they probably also read newspapers.
Right.
So to play it in that manner, I don't think it's going to age well. I'll put it that way. I don't think it's a documentary that can age well because it's made that way. Whereas something like Icarus can age well. Something like This Is Not a Movie can age incredibly well.
Yeah.
Not just because of politics, but because in 40 years, someone can watch that and think about what that would be like. And wow, to be in that oppressive Russian regime or to be in the Middle East where that situation happens for This Is Not a Movie.
I don't think anyone 40 years from now will be talking about what the ending left them feeling like. But I could imagine...
I can't even imagine them watching it.
It's hard to know whether
there will be a better movie made about the study itself when it comes out in 40 years.
but the film that you're describing sounds to me like something that's more straightforwardly informative. Where this does seem a more experiential, where you're left thinking about one, just like how crazy it would be to realize you were a triplet like these guys did, and to subsequently realize that it was deliberately kept from you, and that your sort of upbringing had been orchestrated. I think that's sort of the emotional conclusion that I came with. And really, any point the director wants to make about whether or not nurture can overcome nature, I'm like, that's sort of beside the point. What's sort of just incredibly disturbing is just what exactly happened, which I think this, in terms of
that's the thing. That's what's fascinating. Is that disturbing or not? And if it is disturbing, is it so disturbing that it shouldn't be done? Or is it just disturbing enough and make enough sense that it should have been done, and we give them some sort of societal recompense? It's a utilitarianism view, right? You're saying and that's the problem. We don't know what happened with the study. But if we did, we could make a utilitarian claim of, and I'm not even a utilitarianist, but there is a fascinating argument there of, is the suffering that they endured worth such a boon to the mass of society that it was overall a good thing? And because the study isn't published, we don't get to know that. And that's what's fascinating. And that's not even touched on. Very utilitarian. And that's like such a... that's why I was enamored with the twin study originally, fucking a decade ago. And it's such a terrible thing that your childhood would be manufactured in such a way that you would be tested. Because that fucks with a child's psychology. It absolutely does. But is there a chance that through their suffering, as a group, we can learn something impressively and impeccably valuable that overshadows it, and we can attempt to make any sort of a restitution with the people that were involved in the study because of the boon that they give the broad society? And it's, this is a fascinating philosophical question that's been going around for over 1,200 years. It's, what is the right thing to do when you can help a lot of people by one person suffering?
Right. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, kind of a classic philosophical dilemma. So the movie clearly comes down on one side, thinking that it was wrong to do so, despite knowing I do view that
as a political agenda of that company, CNN. I do view that as their personal political objective at the time, right now. 2018, I do view CNN as doing that on their television shows and in their films that I've seen.
But I don't know. It may be like an agenda for CNN to do so, but I don't know that it would be that unique of an opinion that what was hidden from these kids was wrong, or that this orchestration was wrong.
I do suppose that it's more of a nuanced opinion, but I do think that a nuanced opinion is required to make this film to begin with, and that might be my problem. Because you're dealing with something that's inherently about psychoanalysis, to have someone that isn't familiar with that direct it or do the questioning is very, problematic, I guess.
Yeah, I guess just the conclusion was simple enough for me, which was that it was wrong to have manipulated these people's lives like.
Well, it's wrong to hurt a kid, period.
Yeah.
In any way. But there's a more fascinating underpinning there, and it's about psychology and psychoanalysis, which is, is the suffering that was caused ever possible to reconcile? So a question a question that I would have loved is, what can make this right with you? Yeah. For them to have asked those two surviving brothers, Yeah. And it's very interesting that they make the claim that their brother committed suicide essentially because he was part of the study.
Right. It's
because I have a lot of family members that have committed suicide while I've been alive and before I've been alive, and I don't think that you could ever pin it on any specific thing other than an addiction to something. In my family's case, so it's very fascinating that they make the claim and they don't get to expound on it in any meaningful way.
Right.
They just make the claim, and there's no follow up of, well, why do you think that's the case? Because they didn't know him before they were 19, so it's very fascinating for them to make these broad claims. And I suppose that you would, if it was your twin, you would assume that you know them, but that assumption would be an assumption. It would be an ass out of you and me.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So I think that I'm definitely much more negative on it, specifically because of my background.
In conclusion,
studying it, and you are much more positive.
Right. Relative to you,
yes.
To be fair, I don't think this will come anywhere close to my favorite movies of the year. I think I will.
I think you're gonna have to lower it from that 3.5 stars in Letterboxd. Is what I think.
I would suggest people check it out.
Definitely
Taylor
check
would
it
not.
out, but also follow up. Check it out, follow up, and read about it. And keep an eye out for if the studies ever get published. Follow up with that if you're interested in psychoanalysis and what the effects are of nature versus nurture, because it is something that every parent, minimum, should know.
I would agree.
All right, what's the next movie?
You want a refill?
I do want a refill. You pick the next movie. I'll go open the freezer.
All right. Moving on to our next movie. Thus far, we have done a sci-fi comedic satire. We've done a documentary. We've done sort of a dramatic action film with Sicario. So how about a drama with Leave No Trace? Something a bit more quiet.
I think that we definitely agree on this.
Plays more like a whisper.
Can you hear this poor dear listener? If you can't, that's just how quiet Leave No Trace is.
Gonna turn the volume down.
Nice and breathy.
Ooh, yeah. Which I think we both gave the same score, 4 out of 5, correct?
Yeah, I think that you originally gave it a 3.5. So what made you bump it up in retrospect? Or am I incorrect there?
3.5 was perhaps because I thought it wouldn't linger with me quite like it did. I thought.
Another film that lingered with you was The Rider.
Absolutely.
And did Lean on Pete linger?
Absolutely.
Okay, so on Film Spotting, the episode that I previously mentioned, I think Adam passively brings up that he thinks that or maybe it was Michael, all three of those films are having a conversation with each other.
Love it.
And I do think that they are. And I think personally The Rider is the weakest of them. But we can leave that for later. Why is Leave No Trace so strong?
I think the biggest strength of it, if there is one single thing, are the performances themselves. I have never been a Ben Foster fan. I think this is easily the best thing he has done. I think there is...
Do you think this is the most subtle thing he's done?
Yeah, I would think so. I think there is more restraint. I think he's doing more with his face than he usually does. He's doing much less with words themselves than he usually does. I think about Ben Foster sort of going crazy like he does in Hell or High Water. I think I prefer him in this sort of quieter register, which I think is just much more in sync with sort of the overall tone of this film. And I think he works super well with the girl. I can't remember that actress's name.
Let's just dig into Ben here. Do you think that he's been typecast?
Up until this
maybe
film,
that's why you don't like him, because he's been typecast in a type that you don't necessarily gravitate towards?
Absolutely.
Do you think that he's been typecast in a similar vein as Michael Shannon?
To some extent, yes. I do.
Because Michael Shannon does have... So he has a separate ability with Chicago theater, where he's been able to kind of build out. And because he's done first-time films with very small directors... Right. Because he did Bug, because he did Take Shelter. Yeah. He's been able to build out his filmography because he had the chance to do Elvis and Nixon. right? He's been able to build out his filmography. But if you only go off of movies that had more than a $60 million budget, you know, and not that Leave No Trace has a big budget, but this is the first time that he's had a chance, and this is the first movie that he's been in that isn't necessarily commercial fare. Yeah,
that's fair. So perhaps you could more easily classify him as a character actor, and with most character actors, you sort of like what they're doing or you don't, since it is sort of consistent from performance to performance.
And it's very much
he hasn't been a personal favorite. On Michael Shannon, on the other hand, I have kind of enjoyed.
But is that ironic because of his other stuff? Or if we just talk about Man of Steel, did you love him as Zod?
I did not see Man of Steel, so I can't speak.
Okay, so you're not even seeing these, larger than life performances, perhaps.
Right.
What did you think of Bug? Did you get a chance to see that with Shannon?
I did see Bug. The William Friedkin one, right? I liked him in Bug.
I loved it. It's one of my. I love Tracy Letts' screenplays more than anything.
Yeah, so, exactly. So I think I have just maybe not been a huge fan of sort of the roles he's been attracted to, and sort of what has become sort of his shtick in a way, which has maybe been a little bit more outsized. Exactly. Yeah. Which in general is not usually. It might not be him specifically. It's just that the performances I tend to gravitate towards are something a little more quiet.
But so something interesting maybe is, what do you think about the actors opposite of Ben Foster in those larger than life roles? Is that perhaps one of your favorite Chris Pine performances?
Chris Pine performances.
Hell or High Water.
Chris Pine I do like just a little more in general.
So for me, I thought that his performance was particularly even better because of the color provided by Ben.
Right, certainly there is a juxtaposition there of personalities, which is satisfying. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I guess the problem with the character acting phenomenon is that if it's there to sort of provide that contrast, and it doesn't necessarily leave me really wanting to see Ben Foster in a movie of his own. Had I seen Hell or High Water and not seen anything else of his, I would have seen him there as that, as serving that purpose of contrast. What's so nice about Leave No Trace is that I feel like this does get you excited to see him doing more things where he carries the film on his own shoulders. Not to, give short shrift to the girl, but I think it is just much more satisfying to see him get a little more emotional weight and not be there to sort of be this juxtaposing little ball of chaos or something.
His passive facial emotions too,
right?
Just wreak havoc. They're almost Joaquin Phoenixian,
right.
Without saying a word, Ben can make me go on an emotional ride and be with him every step of the way.
Right.
And I think that's where a character actor can separate themselves from the flock. That's where, to me, Ben Foster separates from like a Jeffrey Dean Morgan.
Who's Jeffrey Dean Morgan?
He plays Batman's dad in the newer DC.
Oh, right.
But he plays like Negan in The Walking Dead. He played the comedian in The Watchmen, which I think is probably his best role, because an actor like him works best behind a mask almost, where you can just see his grin.
Right.
And with Ben, he has something in his eyebrows that can convey moroseness, sadness, empathy, confusion, elation. Like, just with the upper part above his nose, I can change how I'm feeling based on what he does.
Right.
And I think that's the mark of a truly great character actor. That's like, I think why, what's the fellow's name that did Lucky? Paris, Texas as well.
Harry Dean Stanton.
Yes. So that's, I think Harry Dean Stanton never got anywhere because he wasn't able to do something with his eyebrows.
Interesting.
Just as far as a performance goes.
Yeah.
Because you can definitely make someone feel different. If you can make someone feel differently with your face without opening your mouth, I think that you can get a lot farther in making compelling works of art that people want to revisit.
Yeah. So, as he steps away from that character actor shtick,
or even steps
like him in
so hard
No Trace.
into it, I think he steps even harder into it and doesn't. He plays the opposite of what he always plays, right? He plays someone who's beleaguered with depression and post-traumatic stress that doesn't act out.
Right.
Or tries as hard as not to.
Right.
And I definitely think that because Thomason is such an exceptional, almost like off the cuff, like she's not trying to act, young actress, that it just heightens the reality of everything. And I didn't... I'd say after 15 minutes of me being confused about what type of a movie I was watching, I just thought that I was watching real life. And when it ended, I was like, oh, I guess I'm in a more northern part of Washington now.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting to also compare this to Lean on Pete, since they're both in the Pacific Northwest. I think the Pacific Northwest is having a pretty good year in movie making. I think
it's having an equally good and bad year, I'd say. I've watched some of the Netflix films that are based in Washington,
different,
and those
different part of the crop.
Yeah, and if we go back to 2017 with such films as Death Note, but I guess Nerve kind of made up for it.
Is that set in the Northwest?
I believe that final scene was like with Dave Franco and Emma Roberts was here in Seattle, or actually it was shot in Vancouver, but it was supposed to be here in Seattle.
Yeah.
But we've also had this terrible Bella Thorne movie. I don't even remember the name of it, like Sunset Song or something.
I don't think I know that.
It came out this year. I think I gave it a 1. So real good.
All right, so these are our two P&W standouts, I would think.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that they're, I would classify as low budget fare with excellent young actors.
Absolutely.
Excellent. And they're both empathetically driven without trying to derive empathy.
Right. Both pretty tuned into their sense of place. Lean on Pete, I think about Eastern Washington like I never really have before. I think about him wandering out in Eastern Washington with his horse and how sort of quiet his gestures are that really speak volumes, and how just well captured the Eastern Washington landscapes are. Leave No Trace captures a really different kind of atmosphere to the Pacific Northwest, which I think is that the wet greenery. You think about them being in that park. Absolutely. I felt like that was just really, really satisfying texture to the film.
I think that
these characters were situated in.
There's 2 passive shots that aren't important at all that might be some of the most important parts of Leave No Trace, and that's the beginning. They show, I believe it's 2, but it could be just 1 or even more than 2, empty spider webs, glistening in the sunlight, dressed in dew. Mm-hmm. And at the end, it's about 2 or 3 spider webs loaded with mosquitoes or flies, dancing in the sunlight.
Oh yeah.
And I think that there's something very passive and informative about the symbolism of what happens in between those buttressing spider webs.
Right.
Very, I was just taken with the thoughtfulness and the open for interpretation that those images conjure.
I think there are some pretty potent metaphors in this movie that I didn't really that I didn't really tune into right off the bat, and maybe that's why that 3.5 came out.
Were you
first.
The one that went crazy about the Christmas tree making?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you did.
I adored
the
tree farm situation. I thought that was very satisfying.
That part in the film, but I did not leap to such far conclusions as you did in your Letterboxd review.
Right. I did think that was a very satisfying choice for his first occupation. It could have been anything. It could have been...
Inform the listener on what exactly you thought about this Christmas tree farm.
Shortly after Ben Foster's character and his daughter are discovered in the park and forced to sort of assimilate of all the jobs that he could possibly land at his first job, you'd think it'd be like construction or garbage work or something like that. I don't know, something super blue collar. He gets a job on a tree farm. of all places,
which
makes sense in the
very
Pacific
blue
Northwest.
Collar.
Yeah, still,
and specifically in that part in Oregon, it makes absolute sense. If you ever
right.
go down there, I think it's on the road in between Portland and Salem.
Right.
You'll see this place where it's farmland, and then there's hills, and some crops don't necessarily grow well in the soil on those hills, and there is a lot of trees growing there,
right.
specifically in that North Salem area.
Right. Absolutely, it makes
it's
great sense within the place.
Realistically accurate. Like, it's
Absolutely.
all real places.
Right. It makes complete sense for where they are, and it's as blue collar as anything else I mentioned. But on so many occasions, he's sort of talking about his sort of, desire to retain his sense of self and individuality. They say on a number of occasions that he wants to think his own thoughts, and that he's worried that as they assimilate, pretty soon they're going to be, eating other people's food and doing, all these other things that normal people seem to do, and he seems to be stressed out by this idea of just becoming another, another sheep in the flock, or I don't know. I'm kind of mixing up my metaphors here, but I think he's sort of obsessed with this idea about being who he is and not sort of losing what defines him, and getting his daughter to sort of realize the importance of that as well. So to me, the irony of ending up on a tree farm where he's tasked with making sure all the trees look exactly the same, I thought that was just sort of a pleasantly ironic choice of work.
That is definitely pleasantly ironic. I think I took a different tone with the film in my interpretation of what was happening as soon as the newspaper clipping becomes involved in the consciousness of the viewer.
Remind me of the newspaper clipping?
So in the documents that she goes back for with the oversight of the government lady, she goes through and it says a platoon or a squadron plagued by suicide.
Right.
Which implies that because he's not interacting with anyone else, because he's not going to a P.O. box and exchanging letters when they're doing these city runs, that his whole squadron has committed suicide. And that more than him attempting to not become part of the group of people that constitute quote-unquote reality, he's trying to not commit suicide.
Yeah.
And personally, I'm gravitated more towards this plot line where if he's relegated to day-to-day life, he will have suicidal thoughts. But if he's as busy as you have to be and is consumed with just staying alive as you would be in the battlefield, as he is living outside, he can manage to stave off those thoughts. And they're relegated to dreams that wake him up.
Right.
And as soon as he's presented with a solution to help him, the dog, he runs away permanently.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very tied to this newspaper clipping of, because we aren't exposed to the rest of the squad at all, because this is one of the very few documents he keeps in the Ziploc bag. Yeah. He is part of the squad. And he is perhaps the last one that didn't commit suicide.
Right.
And perhaps the reason he didn't when everyone else did was because of his daughter. And now his daughter has outgrown that. But he hasn't outgrown his own desire for death.
Right.
And the most moving part of the tree farm to me was when the helicopter comes in.
Absolutely.
And he starts clutching his ears and crouching. And what dances across his face there, this character acting ability of using his eyebrows to make me feel, made me on his side in that moment more than I was in any other part of the movie. Because by the end, when they're in the trailer, I was on Thomason's side. I was like, no, you can stay here. You can leave every weekend and go camping. You can leave intermittently, and you know where she is, and you can come back and see her. Yeah. But no, he leaves permanently, and she, it ends with her hanging a bag for him. Right. And what I was confused about, and I'm sure that this is just nitpicking, is he never knew about the bag. He never knew about that, who the girl... there's this older gal who's also a character actress who runs the trailer park, who's been bringing this bag to the tree for years, she says. Like 20 years, she hasn't seen him in 20 years, but every time she comes back, the bag's empty, and he loves dried carrots. I don't recall Ben Foster ever being informed about this.
Right. I think that was a conversation between Thomason and that woman. You're right. Yeah.
So I'm curious why... I don't know. Maybe I was reading into it that she was hanging the bag for her father. Maybe that was on me. But I thought she was hanging the bag for her father. And maybe she was hanging the bag in memory of her father or in honor of her father. Maybe I'm sussing this out live right now.
I think, yeah, exactly. That's why we do this.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think I took it the same way, where she's sort of taking on...
No. I took it the wrong way, I think. I thought she was hanging it specifically for Ben. For her dad. I thought she was hanging that bag for him. I really did. At the end there. Like, I was very confused.
Yeah, I think she was... I read it as she was hanging the bag for whoever this woman has historically hung the bag for, but with her dad in mind, right?
Okay. No, I was like, that she's hanging it for him, like, directly. I was like...
Yeah.
So I assumed that, and then I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But my assumption was flawed. So perhaps, maybe the biggest flaw is that, or maybe that's what she wanted us to do.
Yeah.
Maybe she wanted us to get confused there about what it means.
Yeah. To
keep someone alive.
Right.
Who isn't part of society anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting reading to me because, you know, you might I feel like it's easy to just describe the two characters as homeless. I know they don't describe themselves as that.
I wouldn't describe them as that, but that's
right.
Once again, because of my own personal history.
In the short sort of description of the movie, you might describe Ben Foster's character and his daughter as homeless, and you know, what does everybody perhaps wrongly
homeless
associate?
To me is I have a shopping cart and I navigate sidewalks.
Right.
You know, so if you're doing more than that, if you're setting camp, if you're providing for yourself off of the land, if you're trying to use the system in a way that provides comfort, if you're making a point to buy chocolate every time you get paid.
Yeah.
I understand why someone might view it as homeless, but I think because of my own upbringing of being at certain points extremely poor, I understand how there is a home to be found emotionally between those two characters.
Yeah, I could see a certain type of person learning about these characters and thinking of them as homeless, as lazy, as not contributing, as living off public land. And I think there's, which I do not agree with, but I think there's irony in this idea that, just like you said, he could be too bored in regular society, just working a normal job, to not be so distraught that he might contemplate suicide. It's so invigorating for him to live like this.
Not necessarily too bored. I would say not struggling enough. He needs to he needs to be thinking of, like, so their downfall is that they didn't move camp, right?
Right.
And to me, that kind of comes off as he's obsessed with whether or not they're going to be tracked. He's trying to teach her to not get tracked. He's teaching her chess when they finally get caught. So he's trying to teach her strategy dynamics and also how to survive based on resources. Yeah. Which, you know, it is very fulfilling to figure out how much your monthly budget is. Yeah. And then live the most off of it. Right. And and he's just doing that in a way that keeps him from having the ability to consider suicide very often while he's awake.
Yeah. I agree. I think this came out the weekend after 4th of July, as did the First Purge. Two very different sort of movies you might watch while thinking about America, and I definitely appreciate this movie's sort of empathy for different American approaches to life.
And it's more broad approach, I think.
For sure.
I definitely, you know what, I really did not like the First Purge. I loved the earlier Purges. I don't know if you've watched all of the Purge movies, but that's what's made it for me.
I have seen 1 and 2, but not 3. So
okay,
most.
Yeah. The point is brutal murder constantly. It takes about an hour to get to the first murder.
Yeah.
And the first murder is simultaneous with another murder, and they cut between them. Yeah. Was that the ATM murder and the attack on the drug kingpin of Staten Island?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
By the 2 strippers.
Right.
That are hired by his second or third in command.
Yeah. It really just sort of dissipates the tension. It's just not
so they cut back and forth between 2 acts of aggression, and it understates either action because
they just
you aren't
sort of
compelled.
come at the expense of each other.
Yeah, you aren't compelled to, like, is he gonna survive? Well, he's already dead at the ATM. Or is he gonna survive? Damn, he threw her down on the pool table. You're not supposed to hit a girl, but she's trying to stab you. Shit, this is complicated.
Right, exactly. Either one of them might have been fine on their own, but they kind of come at the expense of each other.
Yeah, and there's I don't know what quality of camera they used, but it was not a good one.
Yeah, there wasn't much that I just enjoyed looking at in the First Purge.
I think my favorite scene was when his bodyguard or friend throws him down under the SUV and the drone kills everyone.
The drones were kind of fun, I would agree. I still think my favorite part in any of the purges is before any of the murders has happened, and it's just that the announcement of the purge.
Yeah, and then
I think that's a good moment of suspense. The alarms. Yeah. Absolutely, that is just tremendously satisfying, and that's hard to have such a big moment of suspense that just by the premise of the movie has to be front loaded, right?
Yep.
And then it's sort of like dissipation of suspense after that.
Yeah, dissipation of just the fact that people can murder now.
Right, exactly.
Right? Like, it's not that people can break in. It's not that people can do brutal acts of rape or whatever, which is terrible. But it's that people can cut other people's faces off and wear it now.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing you can do besides try to not be one of them.
Right.
And the impending sense of doom and the just, it's such a great premise and such a terrible execution for a Purge movie.
Yeah, and what's weird about this one is that there is, like, so obviously plenty of people who decide not to participate, and then there are those who do participate. But it doesn't really have any explanation for, like, why
they didn't
that
leave.
Is.
Why didn't they take a bus for 12 hours?
Some people decide to party, right? Like, they make a big point of there being purge parties.
The purge is only 12 hours in the first purge. It's not 24 hours, which I believe is what it moves to after this. And so the first 12 hours are only on Staten Island from 12 a.m. midnight to 12 p.m. noon. Yeah. They all could have left. Yeah. The only ones that should have stayed are the ones that agreed to take money from the government for staying and wearing those stupid contacts. Right. So you can't make an argument for any sort of poverty where someone won't go pawn something to keep their children alive with a $4 bus ticket. I'm sorry. Yeah. It falls apart.
Except that perhaps we are just arguably not in a position to say whether or not it is justifiable for those characters to want that money, right?
I think that I've been in a position before where I feel very comfortable with saying, if you don't love your kid enough to pawn something and get a $4 ticket on a bus for them to go sit on a sidewalk for 12 hours and not die, you are a bad parent. I feel very comfortable in that. I don't think that your color matters. Yeah. I think that the $5,000 you would get if your kid dies doesn't matter because it's your kid and you should love them. Yeah. Now, I understand the debate of your own life. Yeah. And whether or not it's worth $5,000. Absolutely get that. But your own kid, I don't buy it for a second.
Yeah.
That's like, would I keep my cat in an area where she could die for 10 minutes with 50% certainty for $5,000? Or would I not do that? I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Because it's the ethical choice. And I don't buy that they don't love their kids, because they clearly love their kids in this movie.
Yeah.
It makes no sense that they wouldn't have the church do a collection to send all the kids off the island. It just, there's so many mental anomalies that take place. I don't buy it. Not for a second. And that's where the Purge book in previous installments hasn't given me enough time or enough broadness for me to not buy something. It's been a limited character study. And I think that this might be the first Purge where it's not a limited character study on someone trying to survive the night, where it's they try to make a case for the night. And there isn't a case to be made for the Purge.
Yeah.
It's a heinous thing that would never exist in reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exclusive of a fascist regime.
Yeah.
And they pretend that a fascist regime could rise up, and many people say that it has, but it's still a democratically elected regime at the moment. And there's how many lawsuits, and you know, like, this just isn't ever going to happen. So reality is eluded.
Yeah. I still think the Purge franchise exists best as an opportunity just for well-staged action choreography and violence.
And suspense. And they really didn't play with the suspense like they could have.
It's just not like the execution is everything. Jokes. It's like, this doesn't need to have ideas. Like, this should be all execution, and this one just didn't have it. It wasn't
or it can have ideas, but it needs to be ideas that we don't know are ideas until after we watched it and we're talking about it or something, and we're figuring out, oh, maybe they did that
find them for
to
ourselves.
Fuck with me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know,
this announced its ideas maybe a little too loudly.
That's kind of putting it. How many stars did you give it on Letterboxd?
I think I gave it a 2. Maybe
I gave it a 1.5.
Oh, you gave it a 1.5. Yeah. It's like the 2 is like.
I think you might have lowered your standards to mine.
It's probably still just the hope that I have for the franchise. It's like, I cannot help but want this to be like a super fun, exhilarating.
Well, what about that trailer for the limited series show?
I was mildly entertained. I do not think this is the right kind of thing that needs a series.
I absolutely, before this film, thought that it needed a limited series.
Really?
I thought it needed an 8-hour limited series where we spend 1 hour with a different character over the same Purge. And we see different parts of the city, and it always ends with the victim dying, or the victim of the episode dying. Yeah. But after this, going into that trailer, and what they gave, I'm less than very, very, very disappointed. I am extremely disappointed. Like, I don't think it's going to be anything. But if you go off of the last one with I don't even remember his name now. Frankie, not Muniz. Shit.
The third Purge?
Yeah, if you go off the third Purge, you realize that there's a very incredible, compelling story to be told in the gritty streets, trying to survive with guns and melee weapons.
Yeah.
And if they made a show, 1-hour episodes, limited characters, with great, actors that you've seen in things that don't really get their own due. Like, if they could get the guy that plays the alligator man in Suicide Squad, I don't remember his name, and even if I did remember it, I wouldn't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
But he's such a nuanced actor, doesn't have very many opportunities. If he could get a chance to just show us a very compelling story where he's beating people with a crowbar and surviving and throwing that crowbar in a door to run away long enough to go get this shotgun in this alley, and then he goes into the sewer grate and he waits underneath it, and then they go over him, and then he pops up through the sewer grate and he shotguns him. That would be amazing if they could get this talent. But what they've done is not get talent. They've gone for the cheap pop culture thing right now. They're doing this. There's like 9 things that I've seen this year that are this 2 1.5 star fare.
Yeah.
That's very politically charged.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's because Get Out had such success. But what Get Out had was really clear direction in a story that didn't revolve around politics. It revolved around how it feels to be this person. And I feel like these political movies aren't always about how it feels to be this person. It's about how it politically looks and feels to be this person.
Yeah.
And I think it's much more nuanced if they tell me how it feels.
Yeah, Get Out really benefited from a central performance that we really don't get in The Purge. There isn't, like, any particular character that I remember super strongly.
There's the drug dealer, and then there's the girl that used to date the drug dealer.
Right. There are people, but
and
I don't remember
her brother,
any of them.
Who wears the contacts.
Right. I don't remember any of them like I remember Daniel Kaluuya sort of raising his eyebrows at this family, and he's like, this is fucking weird.
Yep.
Right? That is just something you feel, and it feels like it's just kind of steeped in history. There's this weird comedy as you watch, you know, these white people raising their auction papers,
this horrendous
right?
sense of loathing and just oh my god, it was moving.
Yeah.
And terrifying in the worst ways, and so good.
Yeah.
At doing it. And Stephen Root, what a fucking great performance you get out, right? And these, I think that's the thing. These performances don't add up to anything.
I agree. Yeah.
Right? When the CG fire is more memorable than any performance, and it's terrible, it's definitely
makes it very forgettable. It makes it fun for a very short amount of time.
Like, the only thing that compares with that is when they're going up the church that's just been massacred, and there's the jump scare of her friend having survived.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, it's just not a, you know, we've given it more time here than it ever merited.
Yeah. we got here from Leave No Trace.
Yes, we did.
That's how it goes. So we are strong no's on
the first
purge, but strong yeses.
But absolutely give it a VOD and see if it's for you, because it is certainly not for us.
But we retain hope for the franchise, perhaps.
Just don't spend $10 on that ticket. Wait for VOD, people.
Pretty fair. What else we got?
Next? We got LA Confidential, which we're both just gonna agree about.
I
think the tale might have the most for us to dive into.
I think that's a fair choice. I just watched this recently. You watched it a little while ago.
Yeah, I watched it in the beginning of May.
When it first came out.
Yes.
And I think we were both positive on it.
Absolutely. Laura Dern's performance is incredible. The fact that it's a true story depicted by the director-screenwriter is very... it certainly adds a color to it that is missing from what we've talked about so far. The fact that it's true and presented in an authentic way.
Right.
Because the authenticity is what was missing from Three Identical Strangers.
Deep cut right there. Yeah, I've seen more than a handful of people sort of, make the comment, the rather sharp comment that it feels like a Lifetime movie to them, which I think is unfair. I think it does feel like a Lifetime movie if Lifetime movies were of immense quality, great nuance, and excellent performance. Right. I think this is better written. I think this is better acted. I think those are facts. I think those are facts. I think it's sort of the look and sort of the feel of it that maybe kind of give it that sense. I do think of Lifetime movies as usually ones that sort of involve personal suffering in some way, which is not a bad thing. I think like a Lifetime movie is sort of used in a pejorative, but it's sort of just a descriptor for movies that usually involve empathy and aren't terribly well crafted. They're pretty brightly lit. I think that if this is a Lifetime movie, then Laura Dern's previous film that is also excellent, Certain Women, is equally a Lifetime movie. Right. But I don't think that defining it helps someone understand it. Right, but I think the way in which this might fit the description of a Lifetime movie, whereas Certain Women wouldn't, is sort of like the compositions themselves. I think of Kelly Reichardt as being like
so you
attentive.
Mean like the framing of the composition?
Exactly. Like I think of many images. What
scenes? Because I haven't seen it in a while. So what specific scenes give you this?
So
illusion?
I remember
like the rocking chair.
In The Tale or certain women.
The Tale.
I don't remember the rocking chair scene.
Isn't the rocking chair on the... Is that where the scene happens in her youth? Or am I mixing terrible things that happen to little girls?
That is entirely possible.
There's another thing that I'm thinking of where, it could be like The Sinner or something with Jessica Biel.
Yeah.
Also known as JT's wife.
Right. Yeah, I think Kelly Reichardt in Certain Women is super interested in how things fit within the frame, how sound is coming across, and how that sort of builds a sense of place. I don't think The Tale is quite as sharp when it comes to sort of its use of color and its attention just to minor changes in its soundscape. Like I think it does sort of look
it's
like
absolutely an
right?
HBO original film.
Right. Like, I think that's what people kind of describe.
It is definitely it. But it's the same type of a thing that you got with Riley Keough's performance in what is the name of that movie? Do you know what I'm talking about? The movie that she just did earlier this year for HBO.
Girlfriend Experience?
No, that was a limited TV series.
I don't think I know this one.
This is a HBO film that she did with a very prominent actor named Al Pacino, who plays a football coach.
Oh, Paterno. I did not see Paterno.
Joe Paterno.
I know what you're talking
so
about.
she gives this great performance, and it's very much a TV movie.
Yeah.
But it's a TV movie with an excellent performance.
Yeah.
And I think that what The Tale has that Paterno didn't.
Yeah.
Is 3 excellent performances.
I agree. Laura Dern.
Elizabeth
the girl.
Debicki.
Is that the girl?
No, Elizabeth Debicki is the girl who teaches her how to ride the horses.
Oh, interesting. We would have gone with the different 3. I would have gone with Laura Dern, the actress that plays Laura Dern's younger self, and I would have gone with Jason something, the guy that plays Laura Dern's abuser, essentially.
I would have gone with Elizabeth Debicki.
I really think
equally
4,
an abuser.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's not like I don't think
definitely
she's bad,
the young girl, I don't know her name, that plays young Laura Dern. I never for an instant thought that I was watching something that wasn't real.
Me neither. She was
incredible. It was very much like Leave No Trace. After the first 10 minutes, I forgot that I was watching a movie and I was watching reality in every sense of the word, because it was a real story. And it really did happen to the director.
Yeah.
And what she goes to say and not say, I think is the most interesting statement politically or psychologically of the year.
Yeah.
Maybe other than Soderbergh's Unsane, which is regardless of the fact that this happened to me and I haven't grappled with it.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep trying, and that's fine.
Yeah.
You need to accept me for who I am as I sit here on this bathroom floor as both the little girl that was shattered and confused and the adult girl that is confused about why she's shattered and how to move. And I do think it's worth noting that Common was very, very good.
Common was sharp. I agree. I was skeptical. I was very skeptical when I saw him. But
very small performance.
Strong.
But he's asked to be a compassionate, caring lover. And he is absolutely those.
I agree. He was very sharp. I don't think that there are that many other movies this year that had kind of as strong of a cast as it did. I don't know why I keep blanking on the name of the guy.
I think
actor.
Ocean's 8.
Maybe Ocean's 8. I think it's a really
Ant-Man and the Wasp.
I have not seen Ant-Man and the Wasp yet.
definitely.
But
I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer, Michael Douglas, Michael Pena. Did I mention Paul Rudd? How about Evangeline Lilly?
A lot of great people there.
Yeah.
The guy that plays Laura Dern's abuser in his youth, I thought was terrific. I think that's a hard role to do.
I was very convinced by it.
I really was.
And I can only imagine the catharsis that the director would have had directing him.
Right. Exactly.
Like, it was almost like I helped someone grieve just by watching their process of talking it out with themselves in the art form of cinema.
Yeah.
It was I'm very glad that I watched it, and it really sucks that no one's really going to get to it.
It does feel like one that's sort of gonna fall under the radar somehow for the, like, you know, when it comes to kind of thinking about the year as a whole or something like that, or even just like recent movies as a whole. But I think so many movies claim to be about sort of like memory or perspective and kind of like broad ideas like that. And
or
I think
how to grapple with it, or how to handle it, or how to move forward, or if you should. And it does all of that.
This was just so much more satisfying as you kind of figure out how Laura Dern's character is realizing how she had this encounter in her memory versus how it sort of is from a different perspective, and what that really means in a more objective way. Like, that was all just like super rich, no matter what it looked like. Even if it had that kind of TV movie kind of feel to it, like just that character and that writing, I think, like, far transcended any sort of like problem you might have with the craft.
I didn't have a problem with the craft, and I think that me more than you, I look at how a movie was made, and I adjust my position on how to judge it based on that. I don't have a strict criteria of this is a movie, I'm going to judge it this way. I say this is an HBO original film.
Yeah,
I've seen what those numbers look like as far as budget.
Yeah. And
I understand that this is definitely a passion project.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was of the immense quality that it was, regarding its budgetary restrictions, made it better for me. And I definitely use something like budgetary constrictions before I judge the film to have a more nuanced view of how I'm getting to watch what I'm getting to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that, like, that makes sense, but I guess that just ends up leading me towards sort of having, like, different sets of, like, favorites and lists, because there are the ones that I know just sort of affected me the most, that affected me, you know, in the deepest sense, versus those that affected me relative to what resources they had, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's fine.
But so, like, I think the exception proves the rule, right? There's no reason
we shouldn't have multiple lists. And
absolutely. But I think that something like Get Out, once again, is the exception that proves the rule. It's very tiny budget.
Yeah.
Absolutely proves that budget constraints affect a movie. And because it was such a slam, it defined how production companies have made decisions. Specifically, Blumhouse. They're making decisions that they didn't make 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Specifically, the First Purge. You know, they're doing things because of the shadow that they cast with a movie like Get Out. And now the Black Panther is going to prove the rule in a false way, I think. Where, you know, I'm really glad that we're going to get Blind Spotting, which I haven't seen yet. I think that you've seen it. And I'm glad we got Sorry to Bother You. But I think that those films aren't going to be as important as what the director is going to make. And I think that something like Traffic with a K got greenlit because of a movie like Get Out and Black Panther.
Yeah.
Or the forecasting for Black Panther. And I think that the First Purge got made because of Get Out. And because of all these other movies getting greenlit. And I think that a comedy like Uncle Drew got greenlit because of that. And that's like something that was great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because they took the TSA character from Get Out And they made him the fulcrum on which this NBA comedy is built.
Yeah.
And it's just a fun watch. Much like Blockers was a fun watch. You just have a fun time watching it. And there's a lot to criticize about the camera work, the composition, the framing.
Yeah.
But you got to watch some fun characters be fun.
Right. So I'm thinking about a movie like 12 Years a Slave, whose budget I could not tell you off the top of my head.
I can tell you that Brad Pitt was
It probably had some money.
It was his production company behind part of it.
Right.
And it was directed by Steve fucking McQueen. So I could tell you that it had one of the best working directors.
Yeah.
I mean...
I do think the formalism of that movie versus similarly race-focused movies like Get Out or Sorry to Bother You does sort of instinctively want me to put 12 Years a Slave above those movies. In a certain sense, I get a sort of an aesthetic pleasure from the the attention to how things fit within the frame that I don't get from something like Get Out.
Okay, but there's another movie that we could compare to from Nate. I don't remember his last name, but he starred in it. Is that his name?
Birth of a Nation?
Yes.
I didn't see that one, but
we could okay, if you had seen it, we could compare The Birth of a Nation to 12 Years a Slave. And the difference is The Birth of a Nation doesn't have someone who's willing to make a compromise. And 12 Years a Slave has someone who's willing to make a compromise.
You mean character-wise or or filmmaker-wise?
I think that in 12 Years a Slave, we can't tell, but I'd bet there's more than a dozen times where he deferred to the editor instead of his own preference of what to do. And I think that, like Mad Max Fury Road, George Miller defers to his wife. He said, I want you to edit this because you're a woman, and women don't edit action films, and that will make it unique. And I think that in certain films, the uniqueness comes from editing. I think that Nate Parker had such a overt touch in what he wanted Birth of a Nation to look like that it didn't look original. It looked like what we assumed it would look like based on going to history class in 4th grade.
Yeah.
Whereas 12 Years a Slave, we were very confused that Brad Pitt could be a sympathetic slave owner at all. Yeah. We were on Chiwetel Ejiofor's side the entire time, but the fact that Brad Pitt was sympathetic at all made us question our own morality in a very special way that A Birth of a Nation never gets into the nuances of. And I think that a great film makes me philosophically question myself. Yeah. And I think that film that isn't great doesn't do that. Right. And that's why I definitely have more philosophically engaging films at the tops of my lists. Whereas you maybe go more for form. I would say that you absolutely love
greatly
form.
Value form, for sure. Do you think that Mad Max is at the time is high on your list? Do you think is that more for because of your formal considerations or for philosophical considerations?
It's for editing, honestly. Yeah. And I don't think that that's form or philosophical.
They can be both. I mean, I don't.
I think it's in the middle. There's specifically a scene that I was drawn attention to by a Reddit thread, where in the beginning of the film, when Max is being enslaved, he is hit in the head and running through a hallway. Yeah. And you don't get to see the full hallway. She cuts so that you are seeing corners and sides of the hallway and missing entire sections of it. Yeah. As a symptom of you, the viewer, being like Max, hit in the head.
Oh, yeah.
And it is these choices that really elevated it to be a next level action film for me. Because it makes the viewer coincide with the figure that you're with. Yeah. And the figure that you're with isn't necessarily a hero. Yeah. Or a villain. He's just the character that shows you how heroic Charlize Theron is. Yeah. And I really love films where you inhabit the silhouette or the blank space of a character, and then you interact with all the other characters within the film.
that might be a good transition to Gaspar Noé, since that's kind of what Enter the Void is doing, right?
That is absolutely
not. We can start there. That's not chronologically the order.
It might be a
natural segue, though.
We may want to start with Love and end with Irreversible. I think Enter the Void might be more of a middle ground, because in Enter the Void we see some cinematography that he uses in Love. Yeah. And Irreversible is the film that he made because he couldn't make Enter the Void yet. Yeah.
I'm going to go to the restroom really quick, and then we're going to die.
What's love got to do with it?
And we're back.
Starting. A very short break to the bathroom. Very short.
Starting not chronologically, but with Gaspar Noé's Love, which you were positive on.
I am positive on all of Gaspar's work, but yes, I am extremely positive on Love, more than any of his other films, I'd say.
Having seen this in the theater, in 3D, and at home.
Yes.
On both occasions, positive.
And really wishing that you could dodge those cum shots.
I can imagine. I was positive as well. I think maybe not quite as positive. I think you gave... What'd you give it?
4 and a heart.
4 and a heart. I gave it 3.5 and a heart.
I did rate Enter the Void higher, but I do think that Love is a better work.
Yeah. I think right off the bat with Love, despite being... I was more excited for Love than any other of Gaspar Noé's movies. I was most concerned right out of the gates.
Was that because of my pitch, or...
Probably just because of the sheer subject matter. Yes. I think naturally it's
a beautiful blonde French girl and a beautiful dark-haired, I believe, Spanish girl.
Hard not to be somewhat excited for.
That are definitely going to be naked in a bed for a large, significant portion of the movie. I
can't argue with that a whole lot. I was probably more concerned 10 minutes in than any of the other movies that this is going to be too much of an exercise in self-pity from one particular character. As this kid, Marcus, I think his name was talking about sort of regrets or wistfulness he had about this ex-girlfriend and his concern for her being missing. And that I think that did pretty quickly go away, and I came around to like it quite a bit. I think I ultimately found that self-pity to be somewhat ironic, and as that
is definitely his goal.
Yeah, as it becomes more clear that it's there's a semi-autobiographical quality to it, the truthfulness of which, who knows, but it does seem like he's deliberately sort of suggesting that there are elements of him in this character. It becomes a bit more self-deprecating to me, that despite having sort of announced that this is a movie about sentimental love, like this kid is also one who's super hypocritical and self-pitying in a way that I think Noé is very aware of and not too sentimental about. And I thought that was actually pretty satisfying.
He has extremely lofty goals.
He sure does.
To have a loving threesome with a neighbor, in which it does not challenge the relationship with, I believe it was Alexis. Is that correct?
I think that's right, yeah.
And then after he sleeps with the French girl who lives next door while Alexis is gone, impregnates her, and she moves in, and he pretends that it's a good thing. These are, lofty goals that are common in reality. Not the threesome component, but the fact that you get someone that you didn't intend to pregnant, and you try to do the right thing, and it ends up tearing you apart. These are common things depicted in a way that is self-deprecating and honest, which is very uncommon. And it's depicted in this biological essentialism cinematography, where it's showing, the perspective that is often lacking of the cylinder from the side. And in this case, that is the vaginal canal with the penis going in and out of it. But it is how life is created.
Yeah.
And it is not a perspective that is commonly depicted. And it is a perspective that Gaspar brings up continuously throughout his filmography. It is most overt in the scene with Monica Bellucci in the tunnel in Irreversible. And my personal favorite scene from Enter the Void is from a similar perspective of collision within a tunnel. And I think that if you gloss over that, you're missing out on what he's offering to cinematography at his deepest level, which is how films aren't often depicted and how life continues to exist, which is from this side perspective of a canal. Bacteria survives in this warm area of collision and growth and molding and all these things, and then it makes terrible decisions or is forced into terrible decisions, and people commit suicide, or people cry, or people die, and this is Gaspar Noé's filmography, essentially. That that it all boils down into that. At one point, they're sitting on the bed, him and Alexis, and he's talking about her dying, and he says, "I'll cry," and she says, "I don't want to die." In between him saying, I'm going to be sad when you die, and then he just says, "I'll cry," and then it cuts, and behind him is the Tower of Babel. And I don't know if you remember how the movie ends, but he is crying in a bathtub. And magically, almost Paul Schrader-ish, a girl appears who is Alexis, holding him in this bathtub as he's crying, and his son magically disappears out the door.
Yeah, it is a surprisingly emotional ending, I think. I was not expecting it to be quite as emotionally involving as it was, particularly because I felt like it was longer than it needed to be, and I felt like it lost me maybe a little bit. And
when did it lose you?
I would say that there was maybe sort of like 60 to 80% of the way through, I thought his points kind of became a little bit belabored.
Do you remember like a specific landmark scene where you were like, okay?
I really don't. I just remember starting to feel like, despite sort of the beauty with which he was capturing all of this sexuality, he started to sort of lose. It did start to feel just a bit repetitive in a way. Like he wasn't starting to find new ways in which to capture some of this. There's sort of this third, fourth of the movie where there is a good succession of sequences where he's just having sex with Alexis in different places, which are all sort of beautiful, but I did start to feel like sort of the like thematic evolution of what this movie is doing sort of kind of is stalls, and there is sort of like just some visual pleasure that I get from it, but I don't think it necessarily justified the time that it necessarily took to get to the ending, at which I did get some satisfaction.
Did you pick up on any of his philosophical kind of meanderings and conflicts within love?
What are you alluding to specifically?
Paul,
definitely.
Did you see Paul Schrader's Taxi Driver in the movie at all?
Paul Schrader's Taxi Driver, that definitely did not come to mind. I definitely thought.
Do you remember a point where they're walking together hand in hand, him and Alexis? She is in a fur coat, and he is in the same exact military coat that Robert De Niro wears in Taxi Driver.
No, I did not realize that. That sounds like a very specific reference, though.
That is a very specific reference. And he's American. Do you remember this fact?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and he's lust.
Yeah.
Incarnate. And she is, kind of open-mindedness. She is very much sort of that Monica Bellucci character that we see in Irreversible, whereas that angry, lustful character, her husband at the time, I don't remember his name offhand, in Irreversible is very much the character that we see, and he's lusting for these foreign women, but he also wants what he wants, and he doesn't want to be deprived of it.
Yeah.
But he also doesn't want to be held accountable for his actions.
Right.
And it's Gaspar reckoning with these things in the film, and how the fact is that America and France love each other. We have a Statue of Liberty that proves that this has been around, that this infatuation has been around for a while. Many Americans love French New Wave music, love French New Wave film. Many French people seem to love, especially like Scorsese's work in the 70s. So there is this love happening, but it's also, we don't agree on how love is expressed either. But we do love each other. And it is this juxtaposition that made the film philosophically work for me. Because I wasn't just seeing people, I was seeing places attempt to coincide their love. And the fact that they didn't get to have a kid with each other, but that they held each other in grief while the child walked out the door following the mother, was very impactful for me.
Yeah. I definitely think I read it more and found more of my satisfaction on a more of an emotional and personal level than I think sort of a thematic level like that. That makes perfect sense. I think that's an interesting take. I was definitely more interested in it as sort of a work of semi-autobiography.
Any Gaspar film is definitely that.
Right. He seems sort of unable to resist, like, infusing some sort of bit of himself in sort of his characters.
Such as his own penis and his own art gallery.
Quite literally in certain cases. And I found that pretty satisfying, that it didn't feel like it was done in an egotistical way. Like, I think it was done in a pretty modest and humble way, actually.
Yeah, I think that it is egoism at bottom, but I think that it's a very ethical egoism, because he is the person making a picture, and he does think that it's worth making a picture about.
Yeah.
And if you go back to Irreversible, the original reason why he incorporated his own phallus into the picture was because his friend had alerted him to the fact that he was depicting the gay club in a very, very offensive way. And he thought that if he put himself in the gay club masturbating with an erect penis, that he would construe how he more accurately felt into the picture and also get away with it. You know, he was very open about he wanted to get away with it, but it's also that is how he felt. He didn't want to judge them. He was just trying to depict it in a way that served his own story. And I think that he's evolved his perspective of involving his own phallus into it. And I think it is a very metaphorical truth that, you know, his penis represents, you know, it is his ideas that he's depicting in this film. And he is doing it for self-aggrandizement at some level. But he's also doing it out of fear and confusion and wanting answers to questions and questioning answers. And it's a very believable reason to do it, I suppose.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think Enter the Void is probably... it's definitely the one in which he involves himself the least and sort of gives the viewer the opportunity to involve themselves more because of that perspective.
Absolutely.
And
the long gestating Enter the Void.
Exactly. And again, I think almost with all three of them, I think the kind of problem I had with Enter the Void is just the duration of it. I think it loses its
You think that it shouldn't have been 3 hours?
I think it could have shaved off a little bit of its time.
I think it could probably have cut off at least 45 minutes, but you're saying it shouldn't be 3 hours long?
I think that's pushing it.
I think that's a fair statement. But I think that he had a reason to do it, and I think that it's like a lot of early work from directors.
Yeah.
Not a good enough reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if he would have gotten to make that film earlier, it would have been more experimental, more ballsy, less production quality, but maybe a better reason to stay for 3 hours. He wanted to make it for over 20 years. And I think that he got so glossed onto those reasons that they just didn't pan out.
Yeah.
But the way that he lets you embody the specter of this man's life is name a movie that does it better.
Well, I think that perspective is sort of interesting and problematic at the same time. It's an interesting viewpoint because it is so distinctive and so unlike anything else. At the same time, I do find it just particularly hard to identify with the perspective from which we're seeing anything when you don't have the opportunity to sort of get a glimpse at sort of the emotional response of the person whose perspective we're getting, right?
I think that you viewed it from a perspective he didn't desire you to view it from. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying he didn't desire you to view it that way.
Yeah.
He wanted you, as soon as he moves to those from the back shots, from the back of the head, those third-person silhouettes where the character's almost always in shadow and you can barely even tell he's white.
Yeah.
He very much wants the viewer to incorporate themselves into that person. He wants you to be that boy. He wants you to imagine that you are that boy. And I think that's probably particularly hard if you're a girl, to pretend that you're that boy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that if you can, at least at moments, pretend that you are that boy. Yeah. Or that you're that little girl in the car. That the experience you have when you're lulled into that tunnel will be one of the best cinematic experiences of your life. Yeah. I really think that scene is one of the best scenes that's ever been done, where the family has a excursion in the car and everything changes. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's just a perfect piece of digital cinema.
Yeah, this is like a much more direct kind of cinema, right? Like the traditional kind of way of telling a story is just giving us a character that we watch with whom we sort of align or our sympathies. And by putting us directly in that person's shoes, like it is sort of like jarring.
To begin with, we're in his shoes, and then after that, we're in his soul.
Right.
And then after that,
even more sort of bodily.
We're in his... We're in the effects of his experience with people. You know, we go to this overhead view where we're watching his sister, and we're watching the boys and the men that he's involved himself with there in Tokyo, and it's this unique over the head dioramic view. And I thought that what I saw in that movie, interestingly enough, made me think that Hereditary was informed and some of its directorial decisions by it.
Interesting.
And its transitions. Because some of those transitions where you go from body to over the head shot, over the walls, down to the next body in which you're going to follow along the journey is very, it's incorporeal and it's very dioramic. You almost feel like you're in the diorama houses that Toni Collette's making in Hereditary. Yeah,
I can see that. And maybe that was... There was a satisfaction from that diorama-like feel that I got from Hereditary that I didn't quite get here, and that was maybe just because of some of the visual choices that like we kind of already talked about.
So how did you feel about the diorama city of Tokyo?
I was I was less enthralled by it than I thought I might be. I just didn't quite get this.
It comes at an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes into the film?
It does come pretty late, so by that point you're already sort of...
You already know that he's been shot.
You're pretty well accustomed to this viewpoint. It might have been a bit more affecting had that been front-loaded and you were sort of, given this surprising... view of the city, but by that point I was already sort of a little fatigued by the viewpoint, and I just wasn't
fatigued personally in your day, probably.
Exactly. You've just been with the movie for quite a while at that point, and I didn't.
In an exhausting movie, you've died if you've incorporated yourself.
You
into
have
the character.
Literally died.
You have watched the outcome of your death. You've watched the previous moments of your life's depiction from this third-person perspective.
Yeah.
And finally, you're reaching the roommate of the boy that your sister hates is diorama of Tokyo.
Yeah.
And that's where it kind of elucidates the perspective in the real world that you're experiencing as you're entering the void, if you will.
Yeah.
Now, my question for you is, did you go with the DMT or did you not go with the DMT?
Did I go with the DMT? Like, did I feel like I was experiencing that?
Did you buy into his experience? Because Gaspar Noé specifically has a biological take on presenting his film. Yeah. So did you biologically agree and go along with what was happening to the character, or did you not buy into it?
I don't think I did.
Do you think that might have made you not like it as much as you wished that you would have?
Probably. I like we were talking about earlier. I can only imagine that there is a greater satisfaction from someone who has a familiarity with what that drug can induce, right? And the fact that this piece of cinema, this piece of visual art can sort of bring about that same feeling, I think that's probably something pretty special.
And elucidate very similar images.
You're right. But having not experienced that and having sort of gotten the idea that I was supposed to be sort of emotionally aligning myself with this guy and his history, I do felt like I was sort of deprived of the opportunity to sort of get a sense for what he would have felt in these situations versus what I'm feeling, because I'm being sort of transposed on top of him.
So I think that the film builds in a very interesting way where anyone that has had that experience can incorporate their own experience into the way that the film segues into him doing DMT right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And then it builds into why maybe he was driven towards this drug use more than halfway in. And that's where the movie gets very psychosexual. Yeah. How did you respond to the sexuality between the brother and the sister?
I did not respond particularly well to it.
Did it bother you, or were you just neutral? Did you just let it happen, or did you take a hard line?
I would not say that I took a hard line, but I was just sort of like disappointed with my lack of feeling for it, for something that is so provocative, like especially relative to Irreversible and Love. Like I felt like the strength of my response to it just didn't quite match up. I didn't feel as much as I thought I might.
It's a very complicated thing.
Yeah.
Isn't it? The love that a brother and sister could have, and then the consequences of being separated at such a young age and then being reunited in their sexual primes, arguably, could definitely fuck with the proper way of expressing that love, especially with the losses that they have incurred together and the closeness that they would have at sharing those losses. For me, that film Enter the Void works better than Three Identical Strangers, where they're sharing this emotional experience of acute, you can't even fathom it. And Enter the Void gets me to buy into them feeling that in a way that Three Identical Strangers, even though it's real, didn't get me convinced. Yeah. And I think that in Three Identical Strangers, if Eddie was alive to tell me that, I would have been more convinced. Yeah. Yeah. But because he wasn't, I wasn't convinced. Whereas because the camera tells me, and because it doesn't want to tell me, it doesn't want to show it, I'm more convinced of it. And what about the abortion?
The abortion was more affecting, for sure, because maybe because it's something that was observed. Yeah, even had it been shot in a completely different kind of perspective, you know, I think I would have understood that in the same way. So that's not the kind of scene that sort of alienates me quite like some other ones do because of its perspective. Like in that scene, I'm watching it just like I would any other movie, and it's just an affecting.
You're watching it just like you would watch any other movie. That scene,
sort of, yeah.
Dude, that scene had me wanting to cover my face and like looking out of the corner of my eyes. When you're watching her get the metal instruments, and then you see the embryo in the spatter plate peanut thing.
Right,
oh my god!
But I guess I'm saying
so visceral.
It was absolutely visceral. But I don't know. I don't think it was any more visceral than had the movie like just not taken this sort of first person perspective that it did. Had it just been shot in a fashion that sort of gives us this third person idea. I don't know if I gained anything by watching that scene from the perspective of this ghost-like character. I guess that's my point. Not that it wasn't affecting. It was tremendously affecting. So, it was fucked up.
What about whose baby was it?
Whose baby? I don't know that I was even thinking about that in that moment. I think I was actually like very just much in the moment.
Now that we're after it, though, right? Whose baby was it? Because I can honestly say I tried to pay attention for that last hour. I think I did a pretty good job, but I could have missed something. Yeah. I don't know whose baby it was. I legitimately don't know. I know that Mario took his condom off. Right. After that, like main scene of sexuality with the sister, and I know that there are sexual situations with the brother, and I legitimately don't know if that was the brother's child, or if that was Mario's child.
I don't know either.
And I know that Mario says that she said that she's willing to have a baby with me. Yeah. But we never really know whose baby it is. And I think that maybe the perspective given to me elucidated that it could have been his baby, if not is his baby. Yeah. And that made it such a philosophically interesting and complicated scene to watch this baby get killed. Yeah. Because we can make an ethical claim that it should be based on how laws are passed today. Yeah. That is specifically the situation, regardless of the state, where you would be allowed to seek an abortion. But it still felt wrong. And it's not that I'm absolutely pro-choice. Yeah. But witnessing it was very challenging to my own choices. Yeah. Politically, because it showed you the body. Yeah, it showed you the body.
There's no doubt that the visceral sort of relentlessness with which that scene is shot, like it's hard not to feel something. Yeah. No matter what you think about, whose kid it is.
Yes, it's still a kid in the bin at the bottom. Oh man, it was moving. Yeah. And I think that there were, that shot with the tunnel shot are, I think, two of his most important scenes that he's ever done. And
absolutely, yeah.
I think that, the expense is that you had to watch a 3-hour movie.
Exactly, and that's sort of my reservations with him is like I think that there are these like interesting points, like even if while watching them I don't get a ton of aesthetic pleasure, like the satisfaction comes from really thinking about these movies and what he's trying to do. That sort of comes after the movie, I think. That's when the pleasure kind of comes. So when you're sort of getting at what you're sort of working through what he's trying to do,
or even what he did to you. Right. I don't know that I necessarily always get what he's trying to do, but I certainly get that he did something to me.
And then there's sort of that idea that like I think he could have done that to me with an hour less of time.
So I wanted that. Do you think that although he has too long of a runtime, that if he went with a different editor, he wouldn't get the same quality of picture? Or do you think that a different editor could make the movie better and shorter?
I do think a better editor could make them both shorter and better.
Really?
I do.
Because I don't know if something gets lost in translation. I have the suspicion that something could get lost in translation there.
Right. There is sort of this like hard feeling about wanting a movie to be shorter because I just like enjoy cinema.
A tight film.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I want to fit 2 in instead of 1.
Exactly. Yeah. But especially with Irreversible, where I really think of like what's so interesting about that movie is sort of the idea that vengeance doesn't change what it's driven by, right? Mm-hmm. The fact that we're seeing this in reverse emphasizes the point that Marcus, I think I'm mixing up names now, Vincent Cassel's character avenging Monica Bellucci's rape and murder doesn't change the fact that it happens.
And does he really avenge it, or does he get the wrong guy with the fire extinguisher?
Ambiguity
or does
there,
his friend get
sure.
the wrong guy?
Right.
Well, I believe that by the end of the tunnel scene, we figure out that there is no ambiguity. They got the wrong guy.
Right, and that's involving for sure. But I think, again, even in that movie, like once everything beyond the rape, I sort of feel like he's kind of belaboring his point. Like I'm not sure that he's really building on like the idea that he's already sort of convinced me of.
Have you heard about how it's reversed 2001?
Not in any detail. I know people make or think pretty.
Do you remember the poster?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Do you remember pretty conspicuous.
Do you remember the end gravitational shot? On the lawn where the camera is pirouetting, like in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So there's some synergies. For sure.
Remember that Bone Tomahawk scene where he gets his face smashed in by the fire extinguisher?
Oh yeah.
Or Bone Tomahawk-esque for clarity. So that is has been made to be the claim that is the kind of monkey scene where there's the violent war. And then
incredibly primitive, for sure.
And I'll get back into this, but so I think the most important thing that was done in Irreversible is number one, the fact that dialogue was unscripted; it was all improvised.
Yeah.
Number two, that tunnel shot. Do you think that was one scene?
Like uncut?
Yeah.
I certainly perceived it that way. Yes.
So that was one of the first scenes that comes off that way.
Right.
It was shot
Absolutely.
on 35.
Yeah.
But it was edited in post. They did 7 takes. They did take 4 with take 7. They did the first half of take 4 and the second half of take 7.
Yeah.
And you can't tell.
Yeah.
You can't tell
seamless for sure.
You can't tell that penis was added in post.
Yeah.
He had his fly up. The whole time that they shot all of it. Yeah. That penis looks like it accosts the viewer, Like you feel like you just watched her get accosted and now you're being accosted. Like it's a terrible thing. And I think that it provides sympathy and empathy in a way that very few films ever do for exactly what it's like for someone to have experienced rape. And I think agree. That if someone watches just that scene, they can have more compassion in their day-to-day life.
Oh, I completely agree.
In a way that no other film is capable of, which is very ironic because of how Gaspar is perceived by people.
Right, as being sort of brutal or vicious or something like that.
It is one of his own films that can provide this great sense of emotion and compassion towards our fellow people and humans.
Yeah.
Or equisapiens.
Yeah, I agree. It is incredibly ironic that he's perceived as someone who lacks empathy when that scene is so satisfying precisely because you empathize so deeply with the victim of this ridiculous violence.
Yes.
And it's the most satisfying scene of the movie, despite being the hardest to watch. It's a bizarre, satisfying mix of emotions.
So they ordered something like a dozen of those dresses for Bellucci.
Yeah.
And she kept one for herself because she thought it was beautiful. And after the movie, she couldn't wear it because she was sickened by it.
Yeah.
And just that says everything you need to know about the performance. She was sickened by her own fake performance.
Yeah.
That's how real it is.
Yeah.
That's how, if you want to understand what it looks like to see disgust and inhumaneness.
Yeah.
this is the scene more than any other scene in cinema that depicts inhumanity and irreproachable unforgivableness. And that is what is most interesting, because we agree that you can't forgive someone for these actions.
Yeah.
And yet we get mad at the main character because of his attempts towards reconciliation and retribution.
Yeah. And the movie would play completely differently if it was just proceeding in the typical fashion, right? That we would get more satisfaction from the vengeance itself, and I think that's like it's obvious to say that like that's why the movie is as insightful as it is that it's presented in reverse, and there you therefore get more. You sort of have a deeper understanding for the senselessness of the vengeance.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And once you've watched it, it's irreversible. You can't undo it.
You can't unwatch it.
And you'll want to. This isn't something to watch casually. It's something to be ready for. You don't necessarily have to engage with it. It will engage with you whether or not you want it to. But you do need to know that when you watch the scene, you're going to be sick. And you're not going to be happy. And you're going to... You're just going to feel things that you wouldn't normally feel when you watch a movie. Yeah,
I do think of this more as like art with a capital A than I do a movie with a lowercase m.
Yes.
Because the first third of it, at least, where the camera's, as if it looks like it's just dangling from a rope or something like that, getting sent through this club called the rectum.
So it's spiraling, right?
Right.
Just like the police car sirens.
Exactly. I love that metaphor. I remember you calling that out.
The music going is just like the police car sirens. And once it's gone, it makes you sick that it's gone, because then you don't know what's going to happen. But while it's going, you have insight into how you should feel or what should be happening.
Yeah.
And I think that this is probably the greatest improvised film that I've ever seen done.
Yeah.
He claimed that he had Vincent Cassel and Monica Bellucci to do Enter the Void.
Yeah.
Then he had to do Irreversible. They came up with the dialogue off the cuff.
Yeah.
This is just one of those films that will never be replicated, and no matter what he does with his filmography, nothing will ever be as important as Irreversible, because of what it does for any human to understand how to empathize with one of the worst acts that can happen to another human.
Yeah, I would agree, but it's just a strange movie to recommend to anybody, because I think part of my relatively low rating of it is just the fact that the experience of watching it immediately is not particularly good, right? Obviously, it's not.
You shouldn't watch the worst thing happen to someone. Almost
exactly. So it's just one of those movies that doesn't seem. It seems weird to rate it, because.
But you can rate it on its own formality, right?
Right. Exactly. It's more about how the form fits the content.
How did Vincent Cassel act? Did you believe him or not?
I did, but at the same time, I think that's one way in which this is sort of problematic. It's hard to sort of get involved in that first 30, 40 minutes or so when that camera is so disoriented to get involved. This is so...
Okay, what about Bellucci? Did you believe her?
I believed that she was experiencing this violence, but I also don't remember her as a, particularly fleshed out character, to be honest. I absolutely felt the pain and the violence she's subjected to.
When she reaches her hand out.
Right. It's
while she's being pinned to the ground, it's one of the most hard.
But it's not because I've gotten to know her so well, right? It's
no, you don't get to know her until after that.
Exactly.
And what you get to know of her is very much a shadow of a person. You don't get to know exactly who she is. You get to know what type of posters are on her walls, how she behaves, what she puts up with, what she likes sexually. You know, and then there's this very challenging scene of near the end where Vincent Castle, her real life husband, tells her, "I would like to fuck you in the ass."
Yeah.
And that, more than any other scene, since the tunnel, makes you go, "What the fuck, dude?"
Yeah.
Like, I get more angry at that than when he's accosting prostitutes on the street.
Yeah.
And I was pretty angry at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and this was consensual, where she was being flirty, but it was because of the context of before, just any anal sex at all had become this very morally challenging thing, which I think reflects how Gaspar grew up and how sodomy was viewed.
Yeah.
Within
more
France.
of an assault or something.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is one I would recommend, but it's one I would recommend with the sort of qualification that the satisfaction comes from thinking about the movie more than
from suffering.
Yeah.
It's very much it's nothing like, but very much like the experience of watching The Passion of the Christ.
Exactly.
You find art in the brutal realism of the suffering, and if you don't want to watch brutal realism and suffering, then absolutely feel free to throw on My Little Ponies instead.
Exactly.
Because that'll definitely take you to the opposite place.
Exactly. You have to be prepared for it. There's no other way to put it. No.
That's a wrap on Drinking the Movies with Michael and Taylor.
Episode 1. Signing off.